where not just women are in danger, but all marginalized people, where being uniquely different right now might truly be considered a crime. It seems as though we had all slipped into a false sense of comfort, that justice would prevail and that good would win in the end. Well, good did not win this election, but good will win in the end. So what today means is that we are far from the end. Today marks the beginning of our story. The revolution starts here. The fight for the right to be free, to be who we are, to be equal. Let's march together through this darkness, and with each step, know that we are not afraid. That we are not alone. That we will not back down. That there is power in our unity, and that no opposing force stands a chance in the face of true solidarity. And to our detractors that insist that this march will never add up to anything,
Boston Red here with Friday Java, a weekly magazine of political theory, polling, and commentary. It is part of the history called people that make up this fascinating journey. We are part of the Obama network. For that, we make no apologies. What we pledge to do is give you the facts, unabridged, the history, what body politics is, the most up-to-date theories of political science and psephology. Stay tuned for this incredible ride. Boston Red, peace out. From WBRN Radio, riding on the Boston Red Network. Friday Java, the 27th of March, 2020. With heavy hearts, we have been informed of the passing of one of Jerry Pippin's key allies, Paula Alexander Latshaw. She was a great person. We communicated with her on Facebook, and she was progressive. She lived in Dallas, Texas, and had been a retired federal judge. We pass our condolences to Paula's family and her friends, and may she rest in peace. We'll have more on that. Evidently, she died on last week. And a memorial service will be held later due to the COVID-19 virus. We'll hear more, incidentally, from Jerry in episodes to come, some of the historic broadcasts that he made in 2010 and after the election of Barack Obama. Very historic. And that was also 2009, 2010. We had a depression, and his views on that, and we'll be broadcasting that. One thing we've observed is many of the programming, particularly on the BBC, they tend to repeat parts of the episodes that they have made. There's not as much production out there, and also there are less people, because of bandwidth constraints, downloading internet radio or podcasts. We are, of course, on iHeart, we're on Stitcher, and we're on YouTube, the RSS feed, and many other places. You can find us, our programs on the Boston Red Network, whether it be Boston Red, the political side, the economic side of the Numbers Man show. We have a recent one up, and we'll have another one up also. And in all episodes, we do some summarization. The open source report, which you'll do, we've been working on it for a while. We'll get it out soon. And various other programs. We want to do something all about sports, about the state of sports. It has definitely been, and we have the Olympics postponed. The latest postponement was the Indianapolis 500. It will go to August. That is usually at the middle of the end, of May. Historic thing, we've covered it before there in Indianapolis, Indiana. It used to be really, really big in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and there are various other things being canceled. Football, soccer. The only, I think there are 3 countries that are now have it going on. Belarus is one, Nicaragua, and perhaps one other that still actually have players playing in stadiums. So we're seeing across this country various lockdowns in states. California, for instance, Washington State. The cases, incidentally, in Washington State were never that high when you consider New York. But at the same time, the U.S. has passed a milestone, over 80,000 cases. It is, in fact, the one that has surpassed China and Italy. Italy, of course, has 10% of the people that have been diagnosed there have died, a very high rate there. And in New York, the case numbers are going up. The Army Corps of Engineers are building hospitals around the Javits Center and various other places in New York City. The problem is a matter of supplies. There are not enough N95 masks, not enough gowns, not enough agents for testing. The whole system, Bernie Sanders recently talked about this after the Senate passed 96-0 the stimulus bill. Now that is a $2 trillion plus stimulus bill that unfortunately $500 billion of it is going to corporations. And now the latest twist is that the Treasury will give grants to the major airlines, and of course they will take an interest in the airlines. Similar situation happened with the automobile industry in Detroit. What is significant is effectively they are nationalizing parts of the airlines. Now what should have been done was to let the market forces deal with these airlines, and the airlines, there are about 5 major ones now, they're minor ones, and they would have formed into 2 or 3, and then they could have spent their energies consolidating those airlines and making sure that workers' jobs were not lost. Now, part of this package will go directly to workers through such things as unemployment benefits, grants to workers of $1,200, $500 for each child. But the problem is, we were looking at some comments here by some economists. Heather Long, she does economics for the Washington Post. We'll cover that one. But if they go too long, in other words, talking about 2 weeks or so, but if they go for a month or 2 months, by the time the money arrives, these businesses will be out of business. And these loans that they get will not help their situations. And to get the money out quickly, and this is part of the big problem, and this was a problem in the Depression, getting out the checks in the early 2000s. The IRS used tax returns, but much of that was handled by individuals, some at least. It was computerized, but they could use AI, artificial intelligence, to pick up on the taxpayers in the country
And this is part of the problem. The last we saw was they would use the 2018 tax returns, which would be the last one. You wouldn't have 2019 there. But what about people for various reasons did not file a return? Sometimes people do not file because they do not have a refund coming, or that they do not, or I should say, not owe any tax there. Some people do file for the income, earned income credit there, and there are various other situations that could be done. An easier way to have done that would just use the Social Security numbers of people. Everyone has a taxpayer identification number, and they could have sent out the checks, and it would be much, much quicker. The processing, instead of taking weeks, would have only took days. Very similar analytics that some of these loan companies they did before COVID-19 used to establish creditworthiness and make loans to people. That was very popular at one time. The problem with some of these loans that there were very high interest rates to them. That is a subject for another day. But we have our friends from the University of Virginia, Charlottesville. That's Larry Sabato's crystal ball, and we'll always remember Heber Heyer, who was murdered by white supremacists in Charlottesville, Virginia. And we'll be looking at the 2020 primary, what is left of it, and some other things in terms of turnout in some states. But firstly, we'll go to polling here and look at it. Incidentally, Bernie Sanders made a statement on Thursday about the campaign. He didn't say how long he will continue his campaign, but what he did highlight is the necessity for Medicare for all. Because one thing this COVID-19 has shown is the American health system is not ready for prime time. Not enough health workers, not enough facilities, not enough money, resources to healthcare in this country. Although Americans spend more money on the healthcare system that is, as Dave Jones would say, dodgy at best. And this is now showing up. You have to prepare for worst case scenarios. Therefore, such things as the N95 mask and those kinds of things should have been pre-ordered. And how they're handling this, they are letting FEMA handle it. FEMA is a disaster agency. It's not a medical agency. And the Trump administration cut back on funds for the Center for Disease Control, has cut back on the emphasis there, has cut back on food sufficiency, has cut back on Medicaid, and trying to cut back more on Medicaid. And now these things have come front and center. So Bernie's campaign is very important because the American people need to understand, and this is through experience, as old Hume would say, that they are experiencing this and they now know the weaknesses, particularly the small businesses. Now some of the states are offering various funds. Some of them are offering micro-lending, so we advise you to do that. And in one of our episodes, either the week that was, sorry we missed the last one, but we'll have it and the Monday Morning Quarterback in some special types of programming. We'll have that and come forward with it. Let's just do some polling very quickly here. This is from Real Clear Channel. Let's see, just a second here. And we'll get some of the latest polls here. As Bernie said, people with immediate problems, life and death matters, are not paying as much attention to the elections. But this is from YouGov, which is an internet poll. This is the presidential Democratic nomination contest. Has Joe Biden up by 18 points. Biden 57 to 39 for Bernie. The ISUP poll, this is Reuters, has Biden up by 53 to 34, and the Reuters poll on DJ Trump's approval rating at 45. The Politico's Morning Consult also at 45. Interesting, Rasmussen has him at 46. They're using an outlier in these situations. YouGov has him at 47, actually better there. I'm not sure how we explain that one, but just shows where some of the polling. This is incidentally from Wednesday. We had some Friday polling. I don't know what's going on here. Anyway, we'll see before the broadcast is over. The Gallup poll, incidentally, had him at 49. This would have been on the 24th there to see where he was. And the Mount University on Monday had him at 49. We'll get all of this together when we go to it on our next rendition. And let's see if we can get the people from the University of Virginia up here and see where they are. This is by Miles Coleman. He's the associate editor of the Crystal Ball. They've been moving some people around. And this is the latest one. Next Thursday, that'll be April the 2nd from noon to 1. The Crystal Ball will host a briefing to assess the state of play in the 2020 election via Zoom. That is where the editor-in-chief, Dr. Sabato, the managing editor, Kyle Klondike, and the associate editor, Coleman, will discuss the rapidly changing political environment and the latest outlook in races for president, senate, and governors. Anyway, this is a 2020 Democratic turnout. The Democratic primary is essentially in limbo, while the coronavirus dominates the news, prompts states to postpone primaries. We are looking back at one of the more important events in the 2020 primaries, given the nature of the current public health crisis. Still, prior to the outbreak of the coronavirus, as some clear turnout patterns were apparent nationally based on data from 19 states voted the general turnouts were higher rate than in 2016. Well, we have 4 years past, and between Minnesota and Utah, for example, which held caucuses, evidently that turned out not to be to Bernie Sanders' advantage. It was a disadvantage, because caucuses by their very nature are grassroots, whereas primaries can be more manipulated by parties. Washington State awarded delegates through a caucus. That was in 2016, but also held a primary and did not figure the delegate allocation. Overall, 17 of 19 states saw higher turnout in 2020 than in 2016. Two exceptions were Illinois, the home state of President Barack Obama, and Oklahoma was the home state of the late Jerry Pippen and also of Paula Latshaw. Before we dive into some Pacific state-level trends that stood out to us, we want to note that primary turnout is not necessarily predictive of general election turnout, no doubt about that. And this is one of their columnists here, Rhodes Cook, looked at past primary turnout and didn't really see any historic patterns there. Because contested sides naturally will generate more participation on contested sides. They talk about this. DJ Trump did not have an opponent. That said, there has been some interesting trends in Democratic primary seasons, trends that seem to reflect broad changes in the composition of Democratic Party's electorate. The first primary state was New Hampshire, despite criticism from that the state's heavily European electorate is reflective of the National Party. New Hampshire set a precedent in its lead-off primary that some states followed. Turnout was slightly higher than in 2016, but only slightly higher than in 2008. Geographic turnouts was up in the southern part of the state, home to a disproportionate number of voters with college degrees, while rural working class regions tended to show less enthusiasm. And that's one of the reasons why Bernie did not get what he should have received. It offered voters in some swing states their first chance to cast votes in this cycle. Virginia, one of the first states to report returns that night. served as a bellwether in two ways. First, it was clear that in addition to his strength with African American voters, the suburbs were clearly a key part to Biden's coalition's second turnout in the Old Dominion. That's Virginia, was up considerably. The state cast over 1.3 million votes, which represented a nearly 70% increase from the 785,000 votes in the Democratic primary in 2016. One factor that may have boosted turnout was Virginia's lack of party registration. On primary day, any voter can cast a ballot on either the Democrat or Republican side, as there was, of course, no GOP primary. It's easy to see how soft Republicans in wealthy suburbs of D.C. and Richmond could have voted against Trump in 2016's Republican primary, then 4 years later participated in the Democratic primary and backed Joe Biden, who was the more centralist candidate, no doubt about that. In the 10th district, that's a fast growing seat in Northern Virginia, held by first Jennifer Waxton, seems to suggest this type of pattern for the last several decades. Virginia 10 favored Republicans in the mode of the Bush family or former Senator John Warner. But its voters have been reluctant to embrace DJ Trump. In 2016's primary, Trump carried the Old Dominion by 3 percentage points over Marco Vegas Rubio, but his weakness in the suburbs was notable. Rubio carried Virginia 10 by 37 to 29. In addition, Virginia 10 gave then Governor John Kirsch, who played to the center-right more raw votes than any other district in the state. In the Democratic primary this month, more than 150,000 votes were cast in Virginia 10, doubling the 700,000 votes total from the 2016 primary. The turnout spike was higher than a statewide change from 2016. Biden was a beneficiary of the increase, while Sanders added about 5,000 more voters in his second time around. Biden added 31,000 voters to Clinton's showing. Thus, he took a lower percentage share, 51 to 24 margin over Sanders. Also improvement from Clinton's 60% to 40%. Virginia's neighbor to the south, that's the territorial state of North Carolina. The state party allotted unaffiliated votes to choose a primary to participate. Affiliated voters, so a more modest uptick, 17% there. Central North Carolina, a string of a dozen counties stretching from Mecklenburg, Charlotte to Wake, Raleigh, saw a turnout increase 20%. Orange County, which is possibly the biggest surprise of the night, is located here. That's a liberal bastion of University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. This was the only county in the region to support Sanders in 2016. This time, Biden carried it by less than a point, though Elizabeth Warren, then still in the active candidate, placed a strong third. Two metro areas that bookend the state, Asheville in the mountains there, and Wilmington on the coast, saw generally robust turnout increases. But many rural counties, again, cast fewer votes. Indeed, a few miles west, Wilmington is in Columbus County, a rural county that cast 28% fewer votes. We're seeing this disturbing situation. Democratic Party registration, European majority, and poor. Columbus was a reliable blue county by state standards until the advent of Trump. In March of 2016, 61% of the electorate were registered Democrats. 4 years later, the party can claim just 49%. Perhaps just as telling, of those who are still registered with the party were more likely to cast protest votes. Nearly 6% elected in Columbus County voted no preference there. And In Florida, the Panhandle is known as a similar phenomenon. In last week's primary, it stayed true to form. This may be an indication of registered Democrats who won't support the Democratic nominee in the fall. Remember, party registration is not necessarily a proxy for actual voting. North Carolina Democrats retain a registration advantage of 2.5 million to 2.1 million for Republicans, with the above 2.3 million on affiliated voters. As in the Commonwealth, large number of voters, yet Republicans carried the state in 9 of the last 10 presidential elections. Barack Obama did carry that. Oklahoma, one of just 2 states, including this analysis, where turnout was down. In 2016, Bernie Sanders won the primary there. Oklahoma uses a closed primary system, giving only registered Democrats a voice. Since 2016, the Democratic share of the electorate by registration has dropped from 42 to 35%. Not a good situation there. Much of that drop was driven by conservatives and essentially Democratic rural counties. As the only candidate other than Hillary Clinton, a well-known figure who many registered Democrats in the state had no intention of supporting a general election, Sanders was essentially the only option. Instead of making up by 2020, those voters that are making up Sanders' base were shrinking off their Democratic pedigrees. Was shaking off, and the Oklahoma turnout was down slightly from 336,000 to 304,000, but rural districts saw the steepest drop. Sanders' performance upward there. Turnout in Oklahoma's Democratic primary 2016 to 2020. Sanders' correlation bore the blunt of the realignment. National Democrats would certainly like the trends in Oklahoma City. That is the 5th district, held by first-term Kendra Horn, representative there. Horn is Oklahoma's 5th, saw a 7% uptick in turnout, and the other area, Tulsa 1, saw a slight increase, though it's easy to write Oklahoma off as a boring state. Al Gore was the most recent Democratic nominee to carry those counties there. To be clear, the crystal ball rates Oklahoma 5 as a toss-up and Oklahoma 1 as safe Republican. Looking back at Super Tuesday, perhaps one of the most disappointing results for Sanders was his home state of Vermont. He carried Vermont by 86 to 14%, enough to carry all the state's pledged delegates. A beloved figure, Sanders was re-elected to the Senate by 67 to 27, a wider margin than either Barack Obama in 2008 or 2012. But by Super Tuesday, even turnout was up by 23,000 votes statewide. Sanders' share plummeted from 86% to barely 51% majority. The week after Super Tuesday, Biden's strength endured as a handful of states weighed in, Michigan being one. Sanders' upset victory in the state of Michigan, and if Sanders were to halt Biden's upward trajectory, it was critical that the Sanders replicate 2016. Always very hard to replicate something of that nature. The result was a wide 53 to 36 victory for Biden, and of course the local parties in Michigan were behind Biden. A local Democrat same-day registration that was helped by measures the state had enacted since 2016. Michigan, like Vermont, was a state with a high symbolic significance for Bernie. Too much significance in our estimation. Michigan 8th, held by first-term Representative Elsa Slotkin, which included 3 counties between Detroit and Lansing Metro, was a striking example of this. Statewide turnout was up by 32% from 2016. Michigan 8 cast 51% more votes this year's primary, increasing from 84,000 to 127,000. This came as Sanders performed 25 points worse in the district His 56-42 win turned into a 49 to 38% deficit in the general election. Education attainment is an increasingly relevant electoral indicator in primaries. Sanders ran well with younger voters on college campus. Broadly speaking, voters with college degrees tend to favor center-left candidates. In Michigan, 41% of the population had at least a college degree compared to 28% statewide, making a swing to Biden less surprising. Though Missouri received less attention, Missouri, back in yesteryears, and they've had Callahan there, and later Callahan's wife, so they have had Democrats as senators and governors there. Way back to the George McGovern's first running mate. I think I have to think of him before this is over. And then, of course, they had the leader of the House of Representatives was there, also from Missouri. 60 to 64% blowout for Biden. Mixed implications there. St. Louis County blue trending. That's Missouri too. I believe that's Representative Clay's district there. Trump 10 seats in plus 10, seat in 216. And Wagner, she's Missouri 2. These suburban areas around St. Louis was just 51 to 47 spread in 218. As then said, remember Claire McCaskill carried it by 3 points. From her up the ballot, statewide turnout was up 5% from 216, but Missouri 2, an especially robust increase of 24%. Norwood District came close. The city of St. Louis has seen its population steadily decline. The drop there of more than 10,000 votes, very significant there. A lot of followers of O.J. Simpson are there. The decrease in the 8th district, now the most GOP area in the state, is likely due to population declines. Like rural Oklahoma, this once Democratic marginal area has seen European Democrats flee the party. Also, the economic situation has been there also. Last week's primaries were the first since the COVID-19 outbreak. Dramatic turnout dynamics in Arizona and in Florida. Florida be incidentally the next big spot for COVID-19. It hasn't hit there yet. A lot of old people in Florida. Going to be very interesting what happens there. And Texas is another one we're looking at Cranston Analytics. We've been following this in COVID-19. And Gerald Popper, he's a one of these emeritus types, encouraging his development. Key points from his article: last 50 years, American political party leaders lost their historic control of the nominating process. Reduced power held by these expert politicians contributed to DJ Trump's nomination. The cleaner, smoke-filled room, I guess that's a good analogy there. Let's pause in this election season. Look back to the past. Sometimes older is better. For example, historic political institutions, the smoke-filled room is possibly a means to revive American politics. Well, we had maybe the room without the smokeless devices this time around. Anyway, the messy struggles evidently gave us the nation's candidates, such as Abraham Lincoln and FDR. Lincoln won a third ballot. That was in 1860. After offering, I authorized no bargains, but then included the deal makers as the team of rivals in his presidential cabinet. Roosevelt won on the fourth ballot as in 1932 in the Depression after his campaign manager made a vice presidential deal at a hot dog stand. The convention declined after 1968. That was when the then Mayor Daley in Chicago ruled the roost. The backroom politicians were there. The big question is, do we get better politicians today than we had The answer is no. Came to win the nomination not through bargaining, but on the basis of their personalities. And we talked about this, and in the book, one of the books on LBJ. LBJ talked about his father at that time in Texas and in the rest of the country. Campaigns were ran on principles. His father favored the 8-hour day, etc., etc. But by the time LBJ came around, he had done the shift, now this is before 1968, to personal ambitions. Party leaders could influence the process, but convention delegates became more like robotic cheerleaders for those who successfully ran against the gamut of exhausting state contests. The resulting problem was evident in the flawed nominations in 2016, 2020. 4 years ago, Republicans had 17 self-starters, including Baby Bush, who went no place. Kind of reminds me of Tom Steyer. The superdelegates there, Bernie got rid of the superdelegates, at least on the first ballot. But there were some other things came. Party ambitions were further encouraged by the ease of participation in serious national debates. That's something the Democratic National Committee concocted, a scheme. Aspirants only needed a 1% statistical blip in national or state politics, raising funds from 65,000 contributors. That is 5%. A horde of 29 wannabes emerged. 23 jumped the absurdly low huddle. So they were up there, and many of these people were in the same position as Bernie Sanders, was a favorite of a cohesive minority, as most third of the Democratic electorate led in national polls. That was in February. He actually was doing poorly compared to previous runs in 2016. Well, Elizabeth Warren was there. Not Elizabeth Warren was a spoiler. She was not. But she was on a personal ambition situation. She's still on one now. She's serving us in the Commonwealth. That worked well for Sanders, even with his limited base, a 15% thing there. And then they pulled a notorious situation on Bernie by those other candidates dropping out. Sanders' candidates would each get 14% of the vote, a combination of 70%, yet none of them would win delegates, allowing Sanders to sweep the field. Politics also clash with mathematics at a refined level of game theory. The classic prisoner's dilemma game marked criminals suffering severe penalties, that is 20 years in a hypothetical jail, when their enthusiasm, their individual interests, and neglected the common interests to share with fellow criminals. This was an era of the Republicans in 2016. Instead of uniting for their own common goals and stopping Trump, they looked only to their own ambitions, and those ambitions were mistaken. Democrats might have made a mistake in 2020 unless the more moderate candidate combined forces. Sanders' progressive minority could have beat them all, and that combination required the modern equivalent of the traditional smoke-filled room, the public electronic stage of television, sanitized by air conditioning, purified by tobacco bans. Well, not on smoking. Anyway, to top Sanders, the other candidates had to unite behind a hail to the chief, long equity in our contemporary open politics. That allegiance could not be created by hidden bosses, not gained through their promised deals, but it did. Alliance between those alternative entrants and an ominous favorite, Joe Biden. As heir to the Barack Obama, he talked about it. And in fact, Joe Biden started out running a national campaign. And they point to South Carolina. Of course, South Carolina, the Democratic Party there is an African American party, followers of O.J. Simpson. He won 10 of the 14 contests, but this was brought on by the media. Tom Steyer was the first to go. He spent $200 million. Mia Peely withdrew on Sunday night, saying that the party united behind him. And the next day, Amy Klobuchar folded up like a $2 suitcase in the rain, withdrew, and informed the Minnesotans, not only informed Minnesotans, but campaigned openly for Joe Biden. Beto O'Rourke paid Me Too there, patty cake with the Democrats. And on Super Tuesday, Mike Bloomberg, who spent $1 billion to win a little more than 1% of the pledged delegates, withdrew and endorsed Biden. Elizabeth Warren withdrew, and she didn't endorse anyone. So this was a kind of an election that you could have bet on because Biden was the favorite from the very beginning. Now Joe Biden is he has his own problems. He's not the kind of person the campaigns have went to social media, online. He finally got him a podcast together. But because of the Republicans have been into what they call business analytics for a very, very long time, they are the ones that are more conditioned, and their most important element, the conspiracy theories, have been on social media, whether it be YouTube, Facebook, for a long time. So they're dominating that. And at the same time, Biden is a retail politician. There's going to be very little retail politicking for a long time, and not a media person. So the big question is, did they choose the right person or not? Let's go to Heather Long in our remaining minutes here. She is an economist. He covers the economic field here, and here we go. The headline in the Washington Post: $2 trillion relief bill is massive, but they want to prevent a recession. This is Heather Long. On the 26th, just passed a $2.2 trillion relief bill by unanimous vote. Everybody was in for it. The good news: the majority of the money is going to laid-off workers, small business owners, medical centers, state and local governments. The bad news is it won't be enough to stop a recession. And it's an open question whether the nation can avoid an economic depression. 30 style. By any measure, this is a huge stimulus package. This is from James McCann, a senior global economist at Aberdeen Standard Investments. One thing it can't stop is a recession that's coming, no doubt about it. If it's not coming, it's already here. Stay tuned for our numbers man presentation. Anyway, economists say Congress' response was too slow, too focused on big Wall Street firms during the this was the last depression that prevented a faster turnaround. Many analysts said Congress deserves some credit for doing better this time. The relief package is more than double. It was $830 billion that it passed in 2009. Middle class and lower income Americans is slated to get $1,200. Small business owners will have access to $10,000 emergency loans, millions in loans. Only a quarter of that money will go to large companies this time around, but that's enough. Economists say two problems remain: fixing the healthcare crisis, getting money to the people. Constance Hunter, she's a chief economist at KPMG, predicts it will take and if it does, in fact, do 6 to 10 months for the government to get out a significant amount of the money distributed. That's a long time for laid-off workers and small businesses who have no money. There isn't some magic restart for the economy, Hunter says. Before the money arrives, there will be a lot of collateral damage, and it's happening every day. James Bullard, he's head of the Fed in St. Louis. We get a lot of numbers from them. A chilling forecast ahead of the nation's coming months. He predicts 46 million Americans to be made redundant, unemployed. That's 30% of the workforce. That hasn't been seen since the Great Depression. And the president did 50% decline in the economy. And DJ Trump's talking about getting people back to work by April 12th, the Easter weekend. This is not even a stimulus program. That is from Old Man McConnell. It's emergency relief, no doubt about that. To prevent a depression, the relief payments have to get to workers in business fast enough to prevent a chain reaction. Bullard is optimistic that the economy will bounce back in Q3 and 4. Joe Biden is hoping that it will linger on. Compared it to driving a car at 70 miles an hour on the highway and then having to slow to a crawl for a construction site. Well, not exactly. The problem was the economy was in free fall before this happened. There would have been and is a recession going on at the present time. We talked about that. John Russell started a small tech company, Web Connect, in 2008 in the Depression. But he says this crisis is even harder to navigate than the Depression because it's so much uncertainty. It's being pushed. His company makes affordable software for fundraising events and processed $1 billion in credit card payments last year. And of course, all the events have been canceled. It employs 41 people. Our team is like our family. Well, they've cut back on virtually everything, closed offices, etc. There is no economic playbook for how to handle this health crisis. Congress and the White House have taken the first step, but most economists anticipate more will be needed. And the only thing that will truly turn this around is ending the pandemic. And that's a big problem right there as we close down our broadcast. Yes, ending the pandemic is obviously the way to go, but how will it end? Many states are on lockdown now, at least until mid-April. Schools have been shuttered, colleges have been shuttered, and in college communities, vendors there are closed, or they're doing only takeaway or curbside or whatever. So this is a crisis, no doubt about that. This is Boston Red, the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth on the 27th of March, 2020. We'll see you on the week that was, and then on the Monday morning quarterback. We have Numbers Man also, the economic program. We'll be talking more about the economy. Good day.